Captain Sarah was just another passenger in seat 11F, until catastrophic engine failure turned her routine flight into a nightmare. When she radioed her call sign to Peterson Air Force Base, F-22 pilots scrambled to escort them home. Sometimes heroes aren't born, they're simply in the right seat when disaster strikes. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe. Captain Sarah Falcon Mitchell adjusted her seatbelt in 11F and tried to ignore the curious stares from other passengers. At 28, she looked too young to be wearing the dress blues of a decorated Air Force pilot, complete with wings, ribbons, and the quiet confidence that came from flying combat missions over hostile territory. She was heading home to Colorado Springs after receiving the Distinguished Flying Cross at the Pentagon, the third highest military decoration for heroism in flight. The ceremony had been closed to media, classified like most of her missions, but the weight of the medal in her carry-on bag reminded her why she'd earned it. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking," came the voice over the intercom as United Flight 2847 prepared for takeoff from Reagan National Airport. "We've got clear skies ahead and should have you in Denver right on schedule." Sarah closed her eyes and tried to relax. After 18 months of deployment in the Middle East, flying F-22 Raptors on reconnaissance and air superiority missions, she was finally going home for her first real leave in over a year. Her call sign Falcon had been earned during her first week at fighter pilot school when she'd executed a dive maneuver so precise and deadly that her instructor said she hunted like a peregrine falcon, silent, swift, and absolutely lethal. The Boeing 737 lifted off smoothly, and Sarah watched DC shrink below them. She'd grown up in a small farming town in Kansas, dreaming of flying while watching crop dusters work her family's wheat fields. Her father had been skeptical when she'd announced her intention to join the Air Force Academy, but her mother had quietly supported her dreams. "You've got the heart of a pilot," her mother had said. "I can see it in the way you watch the sky." Now, 6 years later, Sarah was one of only a handful of female F-22 pilots in the world, with over 200 combat hours and a reputation for bringing everyone home safely. The passenger in 11E, a businessman in his 50s, glanced at her uniform with obvious curiosity. "Air Force?" he asked politely. "Yes, sir." "Pilot?" "Fighter pilot. F-22s. His eyebrows shot up. "Wow, that's impressive. How long have you been flying?" "About 6 years total, 3 years on Raptors." "Ever see any action?" Sarah's smile was polite but guarded. Most of her missions were classified, but she could share the basics. "I've been deployed overseas, yes. Mostly reconnaissance and escort missions." What she didn't mention was the mission 3 months ago that had earned her the Distinguished Flying Cross. Intelligence had indicated that a group of American aid workers were being held captive in a compound deep in enemy territory. The rescue mission required precise air support to neutralize anti-aircraft positions without alerting the hostage-takers. Sarah had flown lead in a formation of 4 F-22s, using their stealth capabilities to approach undetected. When ground forces encountered unexpected resistance, she'd made a split-second decision to break protocol, diving low through a narrow canyon to take out a hidden missile battery that would have shot down the rescue helicopters. The maneuver was incredibly dangerous, flying a $150 million fighter jet through a canyon barely wider than its wingspan at night, using only thermal imaging. But it had worked. All 6 aid workers had been rescued safely, and the entire rescue team had made it home. Her commanding officer had put her in for the decoration immediately, though the mission would remain classified for years to come. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're currently cruising at 37,000 feet, the captain announced. "Flight attendants, please prepare for beverage service." Sarah accepted a coffee and opened her tablet to read, but her attention kept drifting to the window. Even as a passenger, she couldn't help analyzing flight conditions, wind patterns, and the layer of clouds below them. Flying was in her blood now, as natural as breathing. That's when she heard it, a sound that made her blood run cold. A sharp, metallic bang followed by a violent shudder that ran through the entire aircraft. The lights flickered, several overhead bins popped open, and oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling as the plane lurched to the left. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain," came the strained voice over the intercom, barely audible over alarms in the cockpit. "We're experiencing a mechanical issue and are beginning our descent. Please put on your oxygen masks and remain calm." But Sarah could tell from the sound of the engines that this was no ordinary mechanical issue. The port engine was making an irregular whining noise, and the aircraft was vibrating in a way that suggested serious structural damage. She looked out the window and felt her stomach drop. The left wing showed clear signs of damage, metal panels were peeling back, and she could see sparks streaming from the engine housing. This wasn't a minor mechanical problem, this was a catastrophic failure. Around her, passengers were beginning to panic. Children were crying, adults were praying, and flight attendants were struggling to maintain order while clearly terrified themselves. Sarah unbuckled her seatbelt. "Ma'am, please remain seated," a flight attendant said, hurrying past. "I'm an Air Force pilot," Sarah said firmly. "I need to speak to the captain immediately." The flight attendant paused, looking at Sarah's uniform with new understanding. "Follow me." The cockpit was in controlled chaos. Captain Mark Stevens, a 20-year veteran, was fighting to keep the aircraft level while his co-pilot, Janet Park, worked frantically through emergency checklists. Warning lights covered the instrument panel like Christmas decorations. "Captain, I'm Captain Sarah Mitchell, U.S. Air Force F-22 pilot. What's your situation?" Stevens glanced back, relief evident in his eyes. "Port engine failure, but worse, we've lost significant wing structure. Hydraulics are compromised and we're losing altitude fast. I can't maintain level flight much longer." Sarah studied the instrument readings. Airspeed was dropping dangerously, altitude was decreasing at an unsustainable rate, and the aircraft was fighting every control input. "How long until you lose complete control?" "Maybe 10 minutes, maybe less. We're trying to reach Denver International, but at this rate." Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. Denver was still over 600 miles away, too far for a damaged aircraft. But there were other options. "Captain, there's Peterson Air Force Base about 40 miles northeast of Colorado Springs. It's closer than DIA, and they have equipment for emergency landings." "Military base won't help us with a civilian aircraft," co-pilot Park said. "They will if I ask them to," Sarah said quietly. "May I use your radio?" Stevens nodded, understanding the implications. Military pilots had authority to commandeer resources in emergency situations, especially when civilian lives were at stake. Sarah took the radio. Peterson Tower, this is Captain Sarah Mitchell, call sign Falcon, requesting emergency assistance for civilian aircraft in distress." The response was immediate. "Falcon, Peterson Tower, we copy. What is your situation?" "Peterson, I'm aboard United Flight 2847, Boeing 737, approximately 150 souls on board. Aircraft has suffered catastrophic port engine failure with significant wing damage. We require immediate emergency landing clearance and full crash response. Falcon, stand by for clearance. Are you qualified to assist with the approach?" "Affirmative, Peterson. Transmitting aircraft position now." Sarah quickly gave their coordinates and heading. "Falcon, you are cleared direct to Peterson Air Force Base, runway 13 to 31. Emergency vehicles are being positioned. Be advised, we're scrambling F-22 escorts to assist with your approach." Captain Stevens looked at Sarah with amazement. "They're sending fighter jets to escort us?" "Standard protocol for emergency civilian aircraft in military airspace," Sarah explained, though she knew it was more than that. The use of her call sign had told Peterson exactly who she was, and they were pulling out all stops. 8 minutes later, Sarah felt a familiar thrill despite their desperate situation as two F-22 Raptors appeared off their wingtips. The lead pilot came on the radio immediately. "United 2847, this is Viper 1. We're here to escort you home, Falcon." Sarah recognized the voice, Major David Viper Chin, her former squadron leader. "Good to hear your voice, Viper. Aircraft is badly damaged but still controllable. Falcon, be advised we've got every emergency vehicle on base standing by. Runway is cleared and we've got the best crash crew in the Air Force ready for you." The damaged 737 was now descending through 15,000 feet, fighting them every mile. Captain Stevens was sweating profusely, his hands white-knuckled on the controls as he struggled to maintain their heading. "I'm losing her," Stevens said. "The controls are getting sluggish." Sarah moved behind the pilot seats, her hands hovering near the controls but not touching. She wasn't rated on commercial aircraft and couldn't legally take over. But she could guide them through this. "Captain, reduce power on the remaining engine. We need to reduce the asymmetric thrust that's pulling us left. But we'll lose altitude faster. Trust me. The F-22s will help guide us down." "Viper, what's our glide path look like?" "Falcon, you're high and fast, but that's good. We can work with that. Come left 15 degrees and start a steeper descent." For the next 20 minutes, Sarah essentially became the bridge between military precision and civilian aviation. She translated F-22 tactical communication into terms the airline crew could understand, while using her combat flying experience to help them manage the emergency. United 2847 Peterson Tower, you are 3 miles out, cleared to land runway 13. Emergency vehicles are standing by. Through the windscreen, Sarah could see Peterson Air Force Base approaching. The long runway, the emergency vehicles with their flashing lights, and what looked like half the base personnel lined up along the flight line. Flaps to 20, Sarah called, watching their approach speed carefully. Watch your sink rate, Captain. The damaged 737 crossed the threshold at 160 knots, faster than normal but still controllable. Stevens fought to keep the wings level as they touched down hard but safely, the aircraft immediately pulling to the left as the damaged wing created uneven drag. Reverse thrust, maximum braking, Sarah called and Stevens complied, bringing the aircraft to a stop just past the midfield point. Fire trucks surrounded them immediately, spraying foam on the damaged wing while paramedics and Air Force personnel rushed toward the aircraft. Through the windows, Sarah could see the 2 F-22s performing a victory roll overhead, a gesture of respect that brought tears to her eyes. The evacuation was swift and professional. All 147 passengers and 6 crew members were off the aircraft within minutes, with only minor injuries from the turbulence during the emergency descent. As Sarah stepped onto the tarmac in her dress blues, she was greeted by an unexpected sight. A full honor guard from Peterson Air Force Base was lined up along the aircraft, standing at attention. At their head stood Brigadier General Patricia Hayes, base commander, and behind her, dozens of aircrew members and support personnel. As Sarah approached, General Hayes called out, "Attention! Every person on that flight line, officers, enlisted personnel, firefighters, medics, came to attention and saluted." Sarah stopped, overwhelmed by the gesture, and returned the salute with military precision. "Captain Mitchell," General Hayes said, stepping forward. "On behalf of Peterson Air Force Base and the United States Air Force, thank you for bringing those people home safely. Ma'am, Captain Stevens and his crew deserve the credit. I just provided some assistance." "Falcon," came a familiar voice, and Sarah turned to see Major Chin approaching, having just climbed out of his F-22. "That was some of the finest emergency coordination I've ever witnessed. You saved 153 lives today. We all did, Viper. It was a team effort." What Sarah didn't know was that the entire emergency had been broadcast live on air traffic control frequencies, monitored by military and civilian controllers across the region. Her calm, professional demeanor under pressure, her seamless coordination between military and civilian resources, and her humble acceptance of praise were already becoming legendary. Captain Stevens approached, still shaking slightly from the adrenaline. "Captain Mitchell, I don't know how to thank you. Without your help, without your connections to the Air Force. You would have found a way, Captain. You're a good pilot and you had a good crew. Sometimes we all just need a little help from our friends." The passengers were being processed through the base terminal, many of them asking about the lady pilot who saved us. Sarah tried to avoid the attention, but several passengers approached to thank her personally. "You're a hero," said the businessman from 11E. "The way you took charge, the way you stayed calm. My daughter wants to be a pilot someday. Can I tell her about you?" "Tell her that heroes come in all shapes and sizes," Sarah said. "And that sometimes being brave just means doing your job when other people need you to." 3 hours later, after debriefings with both military and civilian aviation authorities, Sarah found herself in the Peterson Air Force Base Officers Club, surrounded by pilots who wanted to buy her drinks and hear the story from her perspective. "Falcon, you've got to tell us about that canyon run that got you the DFC," Major Chin said, raising his beer. "Word is you threaded a needle that would have made Chuck Yeager nervous." Sarah smiled but shook her head. "That's still classified, Viper. But I will say this, sometimes you have to trust your training, trust your aircraft, and trust that the people counting on you are worth whatever risk you're taking." "To Falcon," Chin said, raising his glass, "who proves every day that the best pilots aren't the ones who never face emergencies, they're the ones who handle them like it's just another day at the office." The toast was echoed throughout the club, but Sarah was thinking about the passengers on Flight 2847, now safely on their way to their destinations via other aircraft. Many of them would never know the full extent of what had happened, would never realize how close they'd come to disaster. The next morning, Sarah's phone rang while she was having breakfast at the base guest quarters. It was her mother, calling from Kansas. "Sarah? I just saw the news. They're saying you helped save a plane full of people?" "It wasn't just me, Mom. There were a lot of people involved. The reporter said the passengers are calling you a hero." She said you coordinated with fighter jets to guide the plane to safety. Sarah looked out the window at the flight line, where her F-22 sat waiting for her return flight to her home base. I just did my job, Mom. When people need help, you help them. Your father always said you had the heart of a pilot, her mother said, pride evident in her voice. But I think you have the heart of something even more important. What's that? A protector. Someone who uses their skills to keep other people safe. That afternoon, as Sarah prepared to fly her F-22 back to her home station, she was approached by a young airman, barely 19 by the look of her. Captain Mitchell? I'm Airman First Class Rodriguez. I wanted to thank you. For what, Airman? My mom was on that flight yesterday. Seat 23C. She called me last night crying, said a lady Air Force pilot saved everyone's lives. Sarah felt her throat tighten. Your mom helped save herself, Airman. And Captain Stevens and his crew. Ma'am, with respect, my mom said you were the one who took charge when everyone was scared. You were the one who knew what to do. Rodriguez paused, seeming to gather courage. I wanted to be a pilot too, but I didn't think. I mean, I'm just a small-town girl from New Mexico. Airman, where do you think I'm from? Sarah asked gently. Ma'am? Small town in Kansas. Population 847. I used to watch crop dusters and dream about flying fighters. Sarah put her hand on the young woman's shoulder. Don't let anyone tell you what you can't do. If you want to be a pilot, work for it. Study, train, and never give up. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. As Sarah walked to her F-22, she reflected on the past 24 hours. Yesterday she'd been just another passenger on a routine flight home. Today she was being called a hero by strangers and an inspiration by people she'd never met. But the truth was simpler than that. She'd been in the right place at the right time with the right skills, and she'd used those skills to help people who needed help. That wasn't heroism, that was just being human. She completed her pre-flight inspection, climbed into the cockpit of her Raptor, and called for taxi clearance. Peterson Tower, Falcon requesting taxi for departure. Falcon, Peterson Tower, cleared to taxi runway 13. And Falcon. Yes, Tower? Thanks for showing us what it means to be an Air Force pilot. Fly safe. As her F-22 lifted off from Peterson Air Force Base, Sarah looked down at the spot where Flight 2847 had made its emergency landing just 24 hours earlier. The damaged aircraft had been moved to a hangar for investigation, but the memory of those terrifying minutes would stay with everyone involved for the rest of their lives. She thought about Captain Stevens, now safely home with his family, probably questioning every decision he'd made during the emergency. She thought about the passengers, scattered across the country now, telling their own versions of the story to friends and family. She thought about Airman Rodriguez, maybe looking up at her contrail and dreaming of the day she'd have her own wings. Most of all, she thought about her mother's words, a protector. Someone who uses their skills to keep other people safe. That evening, Sarah landed at her home base in Nevada, where her squadron mates were waiting with congratulations and questions about her civilian rescue mission. But the moment that meant the most came when her commanding officer, Colonel James Mitchell, no relation despite the name, pulled her aside. Sarah, I got a call today from a 3-star general at the Pentagon. Apparently, yesterday's emergency landing was recorded and reviewed by aviation safety experts. Am I in trouble for exceeding my authority, sir? Colonel Mitchell smiled. Quite the opposite. They want to use your emergency coordination as a case study for military-civilian cooperation. The way you bridged the gap between fighter pilot tactics and commercial aviation saved lives and demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership the Air Force wants to promote. Sir, You just proved why we gave you the call sign Falcon. You saw the situation, assessed the threat, and struck with precision and efficiency. You hunted like a predator and protected like a guardian. 6 months later, Captain Sarah Falcon Mitchell was promoted to Major and assigned to the Air Force Academy as an instructor pilot and coordinator for the new Civil Emergency Response Program. Her job was to train the next generation of military pilots not just in combat tactics, but in how to use their skills to serve civilian populations during emergencies. Her first class included Airman Rodriguez, now Second Lieutenant Rodriguez, who had earned her commission and was beginning flight training. On the wall of Sarah's office hung a photo from Peterson Air Force Base, the moment when an entire flight line full of military personnel saluted the woman who had been just a passenger in 11F, until the moment her fellow aviators needed her most. Below the photo was a simple plaque. Sometimes being in the right place at the right time isn't about luck, it's about being ready when people need you most. And every day, as Sarah taught young pilots about emergency procedures, tactical coordination, and the responsibility that came with their wings, she remembered that cold February afternoon when a routine flight home became a reminder of why she'd chosen to serve. She'd been just a passenger in seat 11F until the moment she heard her call sign on the radio and remembered that once you earn your wings, you're never really just a passenger anywhere. You're always a pilot, always ready to serve, always prepared to bring people home safely. Even at 37,000 feet in someone else's aircraft, Captain Sarah Falcon Mitchell had proven that the best pilots aren't defined by what they fly. They're defined by how they respond when the people around them need their skills the most. The F-22 pilots who escorted Flight 2847 to safety that day had stood in salute not because she outranked them, but because she demonstrated the highest ideals of military aviation: courage, competence, and an unwavering commitment to protecting others, no matter the circumstances. She was just a passenger in 11F, until she became exactly who everyone on that flight needed her to be.